The morning sun bathed my farmhouse in golden light as I sipped my coffee, enjoying the crisp country air. It was supposed to be a peaceful day, just me, my dog Rusty, and the quiet hum of nature. But peace never lasts long when you live anywhere near an HOA. The rumble of an approaching golf cart shattered the silence. I looked up from my porch to see Becky Langford, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, rolling up like she owned the entire county. She didn't even bother to stop at the gate, just drove straight onto my property like she had a deed to my land. That was her first mistake. She stepped out, a smug smile plastered on her face, holding a stack of papers thicker than a steak from my old grill. "Good morning, Jack," she said in that fake sweet tone people use right before they ruin your day. "I'm afraid we have a serious issue. Your property is in direct violation of HOA regulations." I raised an eyebrow. "That's funny, Becky. I don't recall ever joining the HOA." She laughed like I was a child who just didn't understand how things worked. "Oh, you didn't? But last month, we annexed your land into the neighborhood association. It's all legal and binding." She tapped the papers. "And I'm afraid your farmhouse doesn't meet our standards. It's, well, how do I put this politely? An eyesore." I stared at her, trying to process the level of audacity in front of me. "You annexed my land? Without my permission?" She nodded, looking way too pleased with herself. "We're trying to keep property values up, Jack. And frankly, your old barn, that windmill, and she made a face, pond don't exactly scream luxury living. The board has voted, and you need to make immediate renovations or face serious consequences." I set my coffee down, took a deep breath, and smiled. "Becky, let me make something very clear. You don't own this land. You don't have any authority here. And whatever nonsense your board decided in that little clubhouse of yours, it doesn't apply to me." She smirked. "Oh, but it does. You see, we've already reported your violations to the county." That was when I realized Becky had no idea who she was talking to. Because I wasn't just some random farmer. I was the county inspector. The guy who actually decides what's up to code and what isn't. But I didn't let her know that just yet. I took the stack of papers, flipped through them, and chuckled. "This is impressive. You've got a whole list here. Unapproved fencing, unaesthetic barn doors, and, wait, hold on, you're fining me for having a rooster." She nodded. "Noise ordinance." I burst out laughing. "Becky, I live on a farm." She crossed her arms. "And now, that farm is under the HOA. That was mistake number 2. I tossed the papers onto her golf cart. "Well, Becky, as much as I'd love to stay and chat about your illegal land grab, I have real work to do." She pursed her lips, clearly not used to people ignoring her demands. "You have 30 days to comply. If you don't, we'll take action." I watched her drive off, shaking my head. Rusty let out a low growl beside me. "I know, boy," I muttered. "She's a menace." I thought that would be the end of it. Just another HOA power trip that would eventually fizzle out when they realized they couldn't enforce nonsense laws on someone who wasn't part of their dictatorship. But I underestimated Becky's level of pettiness, because just 3 days later, while I was out on a job inspecting a commercial property, my phone buzzed with an emergency call. It was my neighbor, old Judge Whitaker, a retired circuit judge who had seen his fair share of legal battles. His voice was sharp with urgency. "Jack, you need to get home. Now." I frowned. "What's going on?" "It's the HOA. They brought in a demolition crew. They're tearing down your farmhouse." I nearly dropped my phone. "They're what?" "I'm watching it happen, son. They've already taken down your barn. Your house is next." I didn't even hang up. I just jumped into my truck and floored it back home, heart pounding. The road blurred past me as I gritted my teeth, rage boiling in my chest. This wasn't just about some petty fines anymore. They had crossed a line. By the time I reached my property, it was too late. My barn was nothing but rubble. The pond had been drained, the windmill knocked down, and the wrecking crew had their equipment lined up to take on my house. And there, standing with arms crossed like she had just won the lottery, was Becky. I slammed my truck door and stormed toward her. "What the hell have you done?" She looked me over with a smirk. "I told you, Jack. 30 days. You didn't comply, so the board voted for demolition." I clenched my fists so tight my knuckles turned white. "You don't have the authority to do this." "Oh, but we do. The HOA has full discretion over property maintenance, and since your house was a dangerous structure, we expedited the process. My home, my history, my land, destroyed." I turned, scanning the wreckage. Rusty whined beside me, his tail tucked between his legs. "My grandfather built that barn with his own hands. My father maintained it for decades. And now? Gone. All because some power-hungry HOA president wanted to make the neighborhood look cleaner." But Becky made one final mistake. She thought she had won. What she didn't know was that I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to end her entire HOA. I stood in the wreckage of what had once been my home, taking in the splintered wood, the shattered windows, the piles of debris that used to be my family's legacy. Rusty whined beside me, his paws shuffling uncertainly over the broken remains of the porch. Becky stood a few feet away, still wearing that smug expression, as if she had just accomplished something great. The demolition crew was packing up, acting like they hadn't just destroyed a century of history in a single afternoon. My fists clenched, and for a brief moment, I considered the kind of revenge that would land me in a jail cell. But I didn't need to get my hands dirty. Becky had no idea what she had just set in motion. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to remain calm. "Becky, I hope you're ready for what comes next." She scoffed. "Oh please, Jack. This was your fault. You should have complied when you had the chance." I turned to the demolition crew, locking eyes with the foreman. "Did you get a county permit for this?" He hesitated. That was all I needed to see. Becky stepped forward quickly, as if realizing she might not have covered all her bases. "Of course they did. The HOA has jurisdiction over all properties within its boundaries." I looked back at her, my voice steady. "No, it doesn't." Her smirk faltered for the first time. I pulled out my phone, already dialing a number I knew by heart. "Hey Jeff. I need an immediate compliance audit on an unauthorized demolition. HOA involvement. No county permit." The color drained from Becky's face. Jeff was the senior official at the county's zoning and enforcement department, and my best friend. I hung up before she could even form a response. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Becky." She tried to regain her composure. "Jack, you're being ridiculous. The HOA has every right to maintain neighborhood standard. Your house was an eyesore. You should be thanking us." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, you'll find out real soon just how wrong you are." I spent the next 24 hours gathering every piece of evidence I had. The security footage of the demolition crew arriving. The forged notices Becky had sent me. The falsified reports claiming my house was condemned. The property records proving my land was never legally part of the HOA. Every email, every recorded conversation, every shady financial document I could find on Becky and her little empire. And thanks to some connections at City Hall, I found something even better. Becky wasn't just running a power-hungry HOA. She was running a scam. Her HOA had been collecting massive fines from homeowners for years, claiming the money was for community improvements. But the records didn't show a single improvement project. No road repairs, no landscaping upgrades, no community center renovations. Instead, the funds had been quietly siphoned into an account registered under a real estate development company. A company owned by Becky's cousin. It wasn't just unethical. It was illegal. By the time morning rolled around, I had everything I needed. And I was just getting started. The first strike came before Becky had even finished her first cup of overpriced latte. A county compliance officer showed up at her doorstep with a cease and desist order. Effective immediately, All HOA activities were frozen pending an official investigation. That meant no more fines, no more citations, no more enforcement of their ridiculous rules. The HOA's power was officially shut down. The second strike came when I walked into the next HOA board meeting unannounced, carrying a thick file of documents under my arm. The moment Becky saw me, her expression twisted into something between rage and panic. "You are not allowed in this meeting," she snapped. I ignored her, dropping the file onto the table in front of the board members. "I think you'll want to see this." One of the board members, an older man who had clearly been dragged into Becky's schemes without realizing how deep they ran, flipped through the papers. His face went pale. "Becky, what is this?" I leaned against the table, my voice casual. That's proof that Becky's been embezzling HOA funds for years. Illegally annexing properties, faking violations, destroying homes without permits. Becky's eyes darted around the room. "This is absurd. He's making this up." I pulled out my phone and pressed play on the recording I had taken the day before. Becky's own voice filled the room, bragging about how she had the power to do whatever she wanted because people are too dumb to fight back. Silence fell over the room. One by one, the board members turned on her. Voices rose, accusations flew, and Becky's confident facade cracked. "You told us the money was going to fix the park. I paid $6,000 in fines last year. Where did that go? You said Jack's house was condemned. This paperwork says otherwise." Becky backed away, her hands trembling. "This is a misunderstanding. We need to." The doors burst open. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. "Rebecca Langford?" one of them said, pulling out a set of handcuffs. "You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and destruction of private property." Becky's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She turned to me with pure hatred in her eyes. "You did this." I smiled. "Oh, Becky. You did this to yourself." As they led her away, the board members erupted into chaos. Homeowners who had been terrorized for years finally had their moment of justice. People were cheering. Papers were being ripped up. HOA signs were being torn down. But I wasn't done yet. I walked up to the microphone at the front of the room and cleared my throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, as of today, the HOA is officially disbanded. Every fine you've paid? You'll be getting that money back. Every violation on your record? Erased. Every ridiculous rule Becky forced on you? Gone." The room exploded into applause. As I stepped outside, the sun was setting over what used to be my farmhouse, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Relief. Rusty wagged his tail beside me, and I scratched behind his ears. "Looks like we're getting a fresh start, boy." But before that, there was still one last thing to do. Becky had spent years making people's lives miserable. She had abused her power, stolen money, and destroyed what wasn't hers to touch. And now, she was going to spend a long time paying for it. And me? I was just getting started. The town was buzzing with the news of Becky's downfall. People who had once lived under the oppressive rule of her HOA were finally breathing easy, knowing that the nightmare was over. But for me, things weren't over yet. My farmhouse was still gone, reduced to a pile of rubble, and I wasn't about to let Becky walk away from that without paying the price. The legal system was already chewing her up, and from what I heard, she was spending her days in a jail cell trying to negotiate her way out of a mess she had created. The fraud charges alone were enough to put her away for a long time, but the destruction of my property? That was personal. I had filed a civil lawsuit against her, and with all the evidence I had, there was no doubt in my mind that I would win. It wasn't a matter of if, only when. I spent the next few weeks focusing on rebuilding. The settlement money from the lawsuit would take time to come through, but I wasn't about to sit around waiting. My neighbors, grateful for what I had done, came together in a way I hadn't expected. People showed up with lumber, tools, and helping hands, ready to rebuild what Becky had torn down. Some of them had been wronged by the HOA for years and saw this as their chance to finally put an end to everything she had stood for. Others just wanted to help because that's what neighbors do. With every nail hammered and every board placed, the farmhouse started coming back to life. The new barn went up first, bigger and sturdier than before. The pond was refilled, the windmill repaired, and the land that Becky had tried to erase was thriving once again. Rusty ran around, happy to have his home back, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like things were finally settling into place. But Becky wasn't done with her surprises. One afternoon, while I was finishing up some repairs on the porch, I got a call from my lawyer. He had just come from a meeting with Becky's legal team, and apparently, she was trying to negotiate her way out of financial ruin. She had lost everything. Her personal assets had been seized, her real estate scam had been exposed, and now she was offering to settle out of court just to stop the bleeding. "She's willing to give you everything she has left," my lawyer said. "The problem is, that's not much." I leaned against the railing, watching the sun set over my newly rebuilt land. "What exactly is she offering?" "A small piece of land on the edge of town, a rundown property that was supposed to be part of her next scam. It's not worth much, but it's better than nothing." I thought about it for a moment. Becky had spent years taking from people, manipulating them, and destroying lives for her own gain. And now, she was being forced to hand over the last thing she owned to the person she had wronged the most. I smiled. "Tell her I'll take it." A few weeks later, I drove out to the property she had signed over to me. It was nothing special, just a small plot of land with a half-built house sitting on it. From what I had gathered, Becky had planned to turn it into some kind of luxury retreat for herself once she drained enough money from the HOA. Now, it belonged to me. I stood there for a long time, just taking it in. Becky had spent so much of her life trying to control everything, trying to bend people to her will, and now she had lost everything because of her own arrogance. It was fitting, really. But there was still one last piece of justice to be served. A few days after acquiring Becky's land, I got a call from an old friend at the county zoning office. Becky, now out on bail and awaiting trial, had tried to file a permit to build a new home for herself in a neighboring town. Apparently, she thought she could start over somewhere else, pretend none of this had ever happened. But the thing about karma is, it always finds a way to balance the scales. I met with my friend at the zoning office, where he handed me Becky's application. I looked it over, chuckling as I saw the irony in what she was trying to do. She had spent years making people's lives miserable over zoning laws, permits, and ridiculous HOA regulations, and now she was on the other side of it, begging for approval. "Jack, you're the county inspector," my friend said, grinning. "This one's on you." I took a pen, looked over the application one last time, and then, with a smile, stamped it with one word: denied. Becky's fate was sealed. With no assets, no home, and no way to manipulate her way back into power, she had officially lost everything. As I walked out of the zoning office, I felt lighter than I had in months. The fight was over. The town was free from her grip. And my land, my home, was safe. That night, I sat on my new porch, watching the stars flicker in the sky. The farmhouse was back, stronger than ever, and the people who had once been afraid of Becky's HOA were now living their lives without fear. It was a fresh start, not just for me but for the whole community. Rusty curled up at my feet, letting out a contented sigh. "We did it, boy," I said, scratching behind his ears. "No more HOA. No more Becky. Just us, the farm, and a whole lot of peace." And for the first time in a long, long time, I knew that peace was here to stay.